You know, Margaret, you've really let yourself go. Those words hung in the air between us, suspended like dust motes in the pale morning light of our kitchen. After 40 years of marriage, thousands of meals cooked, countless loads of laundry folded, and a lifetime of memories shared, that's what Thomas decided to say to me on our anniversary. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood frozen by the kitchen sink, my fingers still damp. From washing the breakfast dishes, my reflection fractured in the window glass, gray hair pulled back in the same practical bun I'd worn for decades, reading glasses perched on my nose, wearing the comfortable floral dress I'd owned for years. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the casual cruelty of his words. I mean, look at Carol, he continued, not even noticing how his words had pierced me. She's our age, but she still makes an effort. Still, looks good for Richard. Carol, our neighbor, his golf partner's wife, the woman who'd been giving my husband lingering looks at our community gatherings. That's why he still takes her places, you know? Still shows her off. And just like that, 40 years of devotion crystallized into something sharp and painful inside my chest. I turned to look at him, really look at him. The sagging jowls, the expanding waistline, the thinning hair he stubbornly refused to acknowledge, and wondered when exactly I'd become invisible to him. I'm heading out to golf with Richard, he announced, already turning away, dismissing me as easily as tossing aside yesterday's newspaper. Don't wait up for dinner. We might grab something at the club. The sound of the front door closing behind him echoed through our empty house. Empty because our children had grown and moved away. Empty because I'd spent decades making it a home for a man who couldn't even see me anymore. And in that lonely silence, something inside me, something that had been dormant for far too long, finally woke up. I met Thomas Winters when I was 23, working as a receptionist at the accounting firm where he'd just been hired. He was handsome, ambitious, and when he looked at me, I felt truly seen. We married within a year, and I left my job to support his career, believing wholeheartedly in the promise of our future together. Our early years were modest but happy. I stretched every dollar of Thomas's entry-level salary, turning our small apartment into a cozy home. When Emily came along 2 years later, followed by Daniel 18 months after that, our little family felt complete. I threw myself into motherhood with the same dedication I'd given to being a wife. You've got such natural grace, Margaret, Thomas used to tell me. The way you handle everything, the kids, the house. You make it all look easy. His praise was the sunshine I bloomed under, and I worked even harder to deserve it. As Thomas climbed the corporate ladder, we moved to progressively nicer neighborhoods. Each new house required more work to maintain, more social obligations to fulfill. I hosted dinner parties for his colleagues, organized charity events with the other executives' wives, and made sure our children had every advantage. All while Thomas worked longer hours, traveled more frequently, and gradually became a visitor in the life I carefully maintained. You're the backbone of this family, he would say on the rare occasions he noticed my efforts. I couldn't do any of this without you. And I believed him. I needed to believe him. By our 25th anniversary, Thomas was a senior partner at Brunswick & Associates, and we had settled in Meadowbrook Estates, an upscale community in Fairfield, Connecticut. Our colonial-style home with its manicured lawn and tasteful furnishings was exactly what I had pictured when we'd dreamed of success all those years ago. Emily was finishing medical school, and Daniel had followed his father into finance. From the outside, we had achieved everything we'd ever wanted. Inside, though, the cracks had already begun to show. Can't you wear something a little more current? Thomas had asked before his firm's holiday party that year. That dress is looking a bit dated. He hadn't said I was looking dated, not yet. but the implication hung between us like an unspoken threat. I bought a new dress for the party, black, conservative, but more fashionable than my usual style. When I came downstairs, Thomas barely glanced up from his phone. "We're going to be late," was all he said. That night, I watched him charm everyone. In the room while I stood by, smiling the practiced smile of the supportive wife. I noticed how his eyes lingered on Diane Phillips, a recently divorced client who had joined our table. How he leaned in when she spoke, laughed too loudly at her jokes, touched her arm in a way he hadn't touched me in years. "Diane looks incredible. For 48, he commented on the drive home. Her trainer must be worth every penny." I gazed out the window at the passing streetlights, remembering how I'd once been 23 with smooth skin and bright eyes, how Thomas had once looked at me the way he'd looked at Diane that evening. "Maybe I should get a trainer," I suggested tentatively. Thomas snorted. "At our age? Don't be ridiculous, Margaret. Just try not to let yourself go any further." He turned up the radio, effectively ending the conversation. I swallowed my hurt and told myself he was just tired, just stressed about the upcoming merger. We'd been married for 25 years. He loved me, even if he wasn't very good at showing it anymore. As we approached our 40th anniversary, life had settled into a predictable rhythm. Emily was a successful pediatrician, married with twin boys who rarely visited their grandparents. Daniel had moved to Chicago for work and called dutifully on holidays. The house that had once felt too small for our growing family now echoed with emptiness. Thomas and I orbited each other like distant planets, sharing space but rarely connecting. He golfed with his friends on weekends and worked late most weeknights. I volunteered at the library, tended my garden, and tried not to dwell on everything our marriage had lost. Carol and Richard Mitchell moved in next door about 6 months before our anniversary. They were our age, but seemed to exist in a different universe, one where 60-something didn't mean invisible, where marriage still included romance. "Richard surprised me with tickets to see Hamilton next weekend," Carol mentioned during our neighborhood book club. "For our anniversary. Isn't that thoughtful?" Her silver hair was stylishly cut, her outfit casual but flattering. She wore subtle makeup that enhanced rather than masked her features. "Thomas and I usually just have a quiet dinner at home," I replied, suddenly aware of how I must look in comparison. My outdated hairstyle, my sensible shoes, the extra weight I'd gained during menopause and never lost. "Well, that sounds nice too," Carol said kindly, but I could see the pity in her eyes. That evening, I stood before my bathroom mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in years. When had the lines around my eyes deepened into crevices? When had my posture begun to slump? When had I started dressing for comfort and convenience rather than joy or beauty? I opened my closet and surveyed the contents. Practical slacks, loose-fitting blouses, cardigans in muted colors. Nothing that would draw attention. Nothing that suggested I still considered myself a woman worth noticing. "Maybe for our anniversary," I whispered to my reflection, "I could try something different." I withdrew $500 from our joint savings account, a fraction of what we could easily afford, and went shopping. I chose a flattering dress in a rich burgundy shade, had my hair trimmed and styled, even splurged on a professional makeup application. The woman who stared back at me from the department store mirror looked familiar, yet transformed. Still Margaret, but Margaret remembered. On our anniversary morning, I woke early and practiced applying the makeup as I'd been shown. I styled my hair, put on my new dress, and even wore the pearl earrings Thomas had given me for our 25th anniversary. "You look different," Thomas remarked at breakfast, his tone more confused than complimentary. "It's our anniversary," I reminded him. "I thought we could go somewhere special tonight." He frowned slightly. "I told Richard I'd join their table. At the charity auction this evening. I assumed you wouldn't mind." My carefully applied lipstick suddenly felt heavy on my mouth. You didn't mention that. Didn't I? Well, you can come too if you want, though it'll be mostly shop talk. I swallowed my disappointment. I'd like to come. I haven't been to one of the foundation events in ages. Thomas shrugged, returning to his newspaper. Suit yourself. And that's when he looked up, noticed my hopeful expression, and delivered. The blow that would change everything. You know, Margaret, you've really let yourself go. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After Thomas left for golf, I sat motionless at our kitchen table, his words reverberating through me like aftershocks from an earthquake. 40 years, 4 decades of putting his needs first, of raising his children, maintaining his home, supporting his career, entertaining his colleagues, and this was what I had earned: dismissal and criticism. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was my friend Lillian, a widow who'd moved to Fairfield after her husband died 5 years ago. We'd become close through our volunteer work at the library, her vibrant independence a stark contrast to my fading existence. How's the anniversary so far? Her message read. Did he like your new look? I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with unshed tears. What would happen if, just once, I told the truth about my marriage? If I admitted that the perfect life I'd presented to the world was built on compromise after compromise, until I'd compromised myself away entirely? My fingers moved across the keyboard. He said I've let myself go, then left to play golf with Richard. Lillian's response was immediate. I'm coming over. Don't move. 20 minutes later, Lillian burst through my front door without knocking, a whirlwind of energy in her colorful tunic and silver jewelry. At 65, she exuded a confidence I'd never possessed. Her salt and pepper hair cut in a stylish bob, her eyes bright with purpose. Let me see you, she demanded, spinning me around in my kitchen. Margaret, you look lovely. That color is perfect with your complexion. The simple kindness of her words made my eyes well up again. Thomas didn't think so. Lillian made a dismissive sound. Thomas wouldn't recognize beauty if it smacked him in his entitled face. She took my hands in hers. Listen to me. When Aaron died, I thought my life was over. 37 years together, and suddenly I was alone. But you, know what I discovered? I was still here, still breathing, still capable, still worthy of taking up space in this world. I nodded uncertainly. The question is, Lillian continued, what are you going to do about it? Do? I echoed. What can I do? Leave him? Start over at 63? Lillian's expression softened. Maybe. Maybe not. But something has to change, Margaret. I've watched you shrinking for years, making yourself smaller to accommodate his ego. Today might actually be a gift. He's finally said out loud what he's been showing you for years. I sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly exhausted. I don't even know who I am without him anymore. Then it's time to find out, Lillian said firmly. You've clearly already started. She gestured to my dress, my hair. Why stop there? What do you mean? A slow smile spread across Lillian's face. I mean a total makeover, Margaret. Not just your appearance, though that's a fine place to start, but your entire life. That sounds expensive, I murmured, thinking of the joint accounts Thomas monitored so carefully. Don't you have your own money? Lillian asked, surprising me. From your mother's estate? I blinked. When my mother had died 5 years ago, she'd left me a modest inheritance, about $75,000. Thomas had immediately suggested we put it toward renovating the kitchen and master bath, investments in our property value. But something in me had resisted, and for once, I had stood firm. The money remained in a separate account, untouched. I do, I admitted. I've been saving it. I'm not sure for what. Lillian squeezed my hands. I think you've been saving it. For this moment, whether you knew it or not. For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of something other than hurt. A tiny spark of possibility. Where would I even begin? I asked. First things first, Lillian declared, pulling me to my feet. Call Emily. Tell her you're coming to visit for a week. You need some distance to think clearly. But Thomas can fend for himself. For a few days. He's a grown man, for heaven's sake, not a helpless child. I hesitated, trying to imagine Thomas's reaction if I simply left, even temporarily. He'd be confused, irritated by the disruption to his routine. But would he actually care? Okay, I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. I'll call Emily. My daughter sounded surprised to hear from me, especially on my anniversary. Is everything all right, Mom? Not really, I admitted, my voice catching. Your father and I need some space to think. Would it be all right if I came to stay? With you for a little while? There was a pause on the line. Of course, Emily finally said, her tone cautious. The guest room is always ready. But Mom, what's going on? You and Dad have been together forever. Exactly, I whispered. Forever. And I'm not sure who I am anymore. After promising to explain more when I arrived, I hung up and turned to Lillian. She sounded worried. Let her worry. It might be good for her to see you as a person with needs and feelings, not just as her eternally accommodating mother. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. I packed a suitcase with my new dress and a selection of comfortable clothes, my heart racing with adrenaline. I wrote Thomas a brief note explaining that I was visiting Emily and would call him when I arrived safely. I did not mention when I would return. As Lillian drove me to the train station, I felt a dizzying mix of terror and exhilaration. In 40 years of marriage, I had never done anything this spontaneous, this self-directed. What if this is a mistake? I asked as we pulled into the parking lot. Lillian turned to me, her expression serious. Margaret, the only mistake would be continuing to disappear. You deserve to be seen, really seen, even if Thomas is no longer capable of it. Maybe especially then. I nodded, gathering my courage. Thank you for this. Don't thank me yet, Lillian grinned. Thank me when you come back transformed. And Margaret? Make it a magnificent metamorphosis. As the train pulled away from Fairfield, carrying me toward my daughter's home in Boston, I pressed my forehead against the cool window glass and watched my familiar world recede. For the first time in 40 years, I had taken a step without considering Thomas first, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it might just be beginning. The train journey to Boston gave me time to think, to breathe, to begin processing the seismic shift that had occurred in my life. For 4 decades, I had defined myself as Thomas's wife, Emily and Daniel's mother, the perfect homemaker of Meadowbrook Estates. Now, hurtling toward an uncertain future, I felt both terrified and oddly liberated. My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the journey. Thomas, finally home from golf, discovering my absence. I silenced it, unable to face his confusion or anger just yet. Instead, I watched the landscape change outside my window, suburban Connecticut giving way to industrial zones, then the outskirts of Boston, and finally the gleaming towers of the city itself. Emily was waiting at the station, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. At 38, she looked more like Thomas than me, tall and angular, with his decisive movements and sharp gaze. She'd inherited his ambition too, channeling it into a successful medical career rather than corporate climbing. Mom, she said, embracing me stiffly. Emily had never been demonstrative. I couldn't remember the last time we'd hugged. You look different. I touched my styled hair self-consciously. I thought I'd try something new. She studied me with clinical detachment. It suits you. But what's going on? Dad's been calling me nonstop. Let's talk when we get to your place, I suggested, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Emily lived in a sleek, high-rise apartment in Back Bay, all clean lines and modern furnishings. Her husband, Greg, was at a medical conference in Chicago, a small relief, as I wasn't ready to explain myself to anyone else yet. The twins are at a sleepover, Emily explained as she showed me to the guest room. So we have the place to ourselves tonight. Once I'd settled my suitcase, we sat in her minimalist living room, the Boston skyline glittering beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Emily poured us each a glass of white wine, and I realized with a start that I couldn't remember the last time my daughter and I had shared a drink together, just the two of us. So, she said, her doctor's eyes assessing me, what's happening with you and Dad? I sipped my wine, organizing my thoughts. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted. This morning he criticized my appearance, said I've let myself go, and it was like a veil lifted. I suddenly saw our marriage clearly for what it's become. Emily frowned. Dad can be tactless, Mom. You know that. It wasn't just one comment, I said quietly. It was 40 years of slowly becoming invisible. 40 years of accommodating his needs while mine disappeared. 40 years of trying to be perfect for a man who stopped seeing me a long time ago. My daughter looked uncomfortable. All marriages have rough patches. This isn't a rough patch, Emily. This is the culmination of decades of imbalance. I met her gaze directly. When was the last time you saw your father make any effort for me? Ask about my day? Consider my happiness? Emily opened her mouth, then closed it again. She was brilliant at diagnosing physical ailments, but seemed at a loss when confronted with emotional ones. I don't expect you to take sides, I assured her. I just need some time away to figure out what I want. What you want, Emily echoed, as if the concept was foreign, and perhaps it was. When had she ever seen me prioritize my own desires? Yes, I said firmly. For the first time in my adult life, I'm going to make decisions based on what I want, not what everyone else needs from me. Emily's phone lit up with another call from Thomas. She glanced at it, then back at me. He's worried. He's inconvenienced, I corrected gently. There's a difference. After a moment's hesitation, Emily declined the call. I'll text him that you arrived safely. That's all he needs to know right now. I felt a swell of gratitude for this small act of solidarity. Thank you. That night, in Emily's pristine guest room, I finally answered one of Thomas's calls. Margaret, what the hell is going on? His voice held more irritation than concern. You can't just disappear like this. I had to make my own dinner. The old Margaret would have apologized immediately, promised to return soon, done anything to smooth over his ruffled feathers. But I was no longer that woman. I needed some space, I said evenly, after what you said this morning. What I said? What are you talking about? You told me I've let myself go. On our anniversary. There was a pause. That's what this is about? You're having some kind of midlife crisis because I made one comment about your appearance? I'm 63, Thomas. A bit late for a midlife crisis, don't you think? I took a deep breath. And no, it's not just about that comment. It's about years of feeling unseen and undervalued. He sighed heavily, the sound of a man dealing with an irrational woman. Look, if I hurt your feelings, I'm sorry, but this is an extreme overreaction. When are you coming home? I don't know, I answered truthfully. I need time to think. About what exactly? About whether I want to spend the rest of my life with someone who can't see my worth. Thomas's voice sharpened. Is this Lillian's influence? She's been filling your head with feminist nonsense ever since Aaron died. I almost laughed. No, Thomas. This is my own thinking, and that's what scares you, isn't it? That after 40 years, I might finally have thoughts you can't control. This is ridiculous, he snapped. I'm not having this conversation. Call me when you've come to your senses. The line went dead, and I sat in the darkness, strangely calm. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, I had spoken my truth without softening it to protect his ego. It felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The next morning, I awoke to the sounds of Emily preparing for work. She looked surprised to find me already dressed, sitting at her kitchen island with a cup of coffee. I thought you'd sleep in, she said, pouring herself a travel mug of coffee. You seemed exhausted last night. I have plans today, I replied, which was both true and not. I had no specific appointments, but I had decided that each day of this visit would be purposeful, not spent hiding in Emily's apartment. Oh? She checked her watch, clearly anxious about her schedule. What kind of plans? I'm going to explore Boston a bit, maybe do some shopping. Emily relaxed slightly. Shopping sounds good. Treat yourself. She reached for her purse, then hesitated. Mom, about last night. I've been thinking about what you said. About Dad not seeing you. I waited, giving her space to find her words. I think I might be guilty of the same thing, she admitted, her professional composure slipping just slightly. Taking you for granted. Assuming you'd always be there, unchanging, while the rest of us evolved. I'm sorry for that. Unexpected tears pricked my eyes. Thank you for saying that. She nodded, already retreating behind her efficient facade. I've got a full clinic today, but maybe tonight we could have dinner. Just us? I'd like that. Very much. After Emily left, I took the subway to Newbury Street, Boston's upscale shopping district. Armed with my inheritance and a newfound sense of purpose, I entered the kind of boutiques I'd always walked past before, believing their offerings weren't for women like me. Can I help you find something? Asked a stylish sales associate in the first store. In the past, I would have mumbled an apology and retreated. Today, I stood straighter. Yes, I said clearly. I need a complete wardrobe refresh. I'm starting over. The young woman's face lit up. A transformation. My favorite kind of project. I'm Zoe, by the way. Margaret, I replied, offering my hand. And fair warning, I've been dressing practically, not stylishly, for about 40 years now. Zoe smiled warmly. Then we have a lot of catching up to do. What followed was one of the most unexpectedly enjoyable experiences of my life. Zoe didn't try to dress me like a 20-year-old, nor did she steer me toward the shapeless, matronly outfits I'd resigned myself to. Instead, she brought me well-cut trousers, flattering knit tops, a butter-soft leather jacket, and a few dresses that skimmed my curves rather than hiding them. You have a wonderful figure, she commented, adjusting a wrap dress that emphasized my waist. And your coloring is gorgeous. Those silver highlights in your hair against your skin tone? Stunning. I blinked at my reflection, hardly recognizing. The woman looking back at me. She looked vibrant, present, alive. I'll take it all, I decided impulsively, ignoring the practical voice in my head that had always calculated cost per wear and prioritized durability over beauty. Zoe beamed. Shall I have everything delivered to your address? I hesitated, then made another decision. No, I'll take the dress and one casual outfit with me. The rest can wait until I have a more permanent address. The words hung in the air, making real what I had only begun to consider. I might not return to Meadowbrook Estates. I might not continue being Mrs. Thomas Winters of Fairfield, Connecticut. From the boutique, I moved on to a high-end salon I'd spotted across the street. Walking in without an appointment was another departure from my usual careful planning, but the receptionist's eyes lit up when I explained what I wanted. Paolo has a cancellation in 15 minutes, she said. He's amazing with transformations. Paolo turned out to be a silver-haired Italian man in his 50s, with an artist's eye and gentle hands. He studied my face and hair with respectful attention. "You have good bone structure," he pronounced. "And your hair. It's thick, healthy. We can do much better than this, yes?" "Yes," I agreed, surrendering to his expertise. 2 hours later, I emerged with a sophisticated bob that framed my face and brightened my complexion. Paolo had convinced me to accept subtle highlights that enhanced my natural silver rather than covering it, and the effect was elegant rather than aging. "Remember what I showed you," he instructed as I paid. "This style is meant to be easy, not perfect. Movement is beautiful. Life is in movement." I touched my new hair, marveling at how light it felt, both physically and metaphorically. "Thank you, Paolo." My transformation continued at a nearby makeup boutique, where a patient consultant named Miguel taught me how to enhance my features with products that worked for my skin type and age. "Makeup should make you feel confident, not masked," he explained, showing me how to apply a lightweight foundation that evened my tone without settling into lines. "The goal is to look like yourself, just well-rested and happy." By late afternoon, laden with shopping bags and filled with a strange, new energy, I stopped at a cafe to rest and reflect. As I sipped an artisanal coffee, another small indulgence I'd have skipped in my previous life, I caught sight of my reflection in the cafe window. The woman looking back at me wasn't young, but she wasn't invisible either. She had style, presence, a certain quiet confidence. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I felt aligned with my outer appearance, as if the exterior finally reflected the personhood I'd been suppressing. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Meeting ran long, home by 7. Still on for dinner?" I replied affirmatively, then noticed several missed calls from Thomas. He'd left voicemails too, his tone evolving from irritation to something approaching concern. The final one, from just an hour ago, caught me off guard. "Margaret," his voice sounded strained. "I don't understand what's happening, but I miss you. The house feels empty without you. Please call me back." A week ago, those words would have melted my resolve immediately. Now, I felt a complex mix of emotions, a lingering tenderness for the man I'd shared my life with, but also a clear-eyed recognition of the pattern. Thomas had always known exactly what to say when he wanted to pull me back into orbit around him. I tucked my phone away without returning his call, giving myself permission to prioritize my own journey over his comfort. That evening, Emily did a double-take when she saw me waiting in her living room. "Mom, wow, you look incredible." I smoothed my new dress self-consciously. "Too much?" "Not at all," she assured me, studying my transformation. "It's just, I don't think I've ever seen you look so, I don't know, present. Like you're fully inhabiting your own body." Her observation was surprisingly insightful. "That's exactly how it feels," I admitted. "Like I've been living slightly adjacent to myself for years, and now I've stepped back in." Emily's expression softened with a sadness that caught me off guard. "I didn't realize how much you'd disappeared until I see you like this." We went to a small Italian restaurant a few blocks from her apartment, the kind of intimate, atmospheric place Thomas would have dismissed as overpriced and pretentious. Over pasta and wine, Emily and I talked, really talked, in a way we hadn't since she was a teenager. "I always admired how put together you were," she confessed, twirling linguine around her fork. "The perfect home, the perfect meals, everything running smoothly. I tried to emulate that when I first got married, and I nearly had a breakdown trying to be a top surgeon and a perfect homemaker simultaneously." I winced, recognizing the impossible standard I'd helped create. "I'm sorry if I made it look effortless. It wasn't. And honestly, I think I lost pieces of myself along the way, trying to maintain that perfection." Is that why you left? Emily asked directly. Because Dad didn't appreciate the sacrifice? I considered her question carefully. Not exactly. I left because I finally recognized that I've been complicit in my own disappearance. I've spent decades prioritizing everyone else's needs and wants. Your father's, yours and Daniel's, even our social circle's expectations, while ignoring my own. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out who Margaret is when she's not defined by her relationships to other people. Emily nodded slowly, her analytical mind processing. That sounds healthy, actually. She hesitated, then added, Dad called me again today. He sounded different, worried, maybe even a little scared. He's never had to consider my absence. Before, I said quietly. I've always been the constant, the fixed point around which everyone else's lives could revolve freely. Do you think you'll go back to him? The directness of her question startled me. I don't know, I answered honestly. That depends on whether there's room in our marriage for the person I'm becoming. Over the next few days, my external transformation continued. I had my nails done professionally for the first time in years, not in a practical neutral, but in a rich burgundy that made me smile whenever I glimpsed my hands. I invested in quality skincare products, splurged on a designer handbag I'd admired for years, even got fitted for luxurious lingerie that made me feel sensual rather than matronly. But the more significant changes were happening internally. I spent hours at Boston's museums, reacquainting myself with the art history I'd studied in college before marriage redirected my path. I attended a poetry reading at a local bookstore, sat in on a lecture at Harvard, and took an architectural walking tour of Beacon Hill, all interests I'd set aside when they didn't fit neatly into my role as wife and mother. On my fourth night in Boston, I met Emily's colleagues at a dinner party she hosted. In the past, I would have insisted on cooking, on taking care of everyone else while remaining in the background. Instead, I helped Emily order catering and then engaged fully in conversations with these accomplished professionals, offering my own perspectives without self-deprecation or apology. Your mother is fascinating, I overheard one of Emily's friends commenting later. I had no idea she knew so much about mid-century architecture. Emily looked mildly surprised. Neither did I, actually. The twins came home from their grandparents the next day, and I found myself connecting with them in a new way as well. Rather than automatically sliding into the conventional grandmother role, baking cookies, offering unconditional praise, existing primarily to make them feel special, I shared real parts of myself with them. I told them about the art I'd seen, asked for their opinions, listened to their interests with genuine curiosity rather than performative enthusiasm. Grandma's different, I overheard 11-year-old Jason telling his brother Jacob. Like cooler. Ow. Their innocent observation made me wonder how many other relationships in my life had been limited by the narrow version of myself I'd presented to the world. On the morning of my 6th day in Boston, Thomas called again. This time, I answered. Margaret, he sounded relieved. Finally. Are you coming home soon? This has gone on long enough, don't you think? I'd anticipated this question, but his presumptive tone still rankled. No, Thomas, I don't think it has. What do you mean? It's been nearly a week. You've made your point. I sighed, recognizing our old pattern trying to reassert itself. Thomas deciding when my feelings were valid, when they'd been sufficiently expressed, when it was time to return to normal. This isn't about making a point, I explained, keeping my voice level. I'm reassessing our marriage and my life, and I need more time. His response was immediate and predictable. Our marriage? What's wrong with our marriage? We've been together 40 years, for God's sake. We built a life together. We raised children. What more do you want? That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out, I replied. What I want. Thomas scoffed. And what about what I want? What about our vows? For better or worse, remember? You can't just walk away because I made one thoughtless comment. It wasn't one comment, Thomas. It was decades of thoughtlessness, decades of taking me for granted, of treating me like a function rather than a person. That's not fair, he protested. I've always provided for you, given you a beautiful home, security, status. Things, I interrupted. You've given me things. When was the last time you asked about my dreams, my thoughts, my desires? When was the last time you looked at me, really looked at me, and saw me as a woman, not just your wife? The silence that followed was telling. I could almost see him in our kitchen, pacing as he tried to formulate an answer that would appease me without requiring him to acknowledge the truth. I love you, Margaret, he finally said, his voice softer. Isn't that what matters? Once, those words would have been enough. Now, they felt hollow. Love without respect isn't love, Thomas. It's ownership. He inhaled sharply. So what now? You've had your little rebellion, bought some new clothes, gotten your hair done. Are you just going to throw away 40 years of marriage? The dismissiveness in his tone confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Thomas didn't want me. He wanted the comfort and service I provided. He wanted the Margaret who had made herself smaller to accommodate his greatness, not the woman emerging from that shadow. I don't know what happens next, I said honestly, but I do know I won't go back to being invisible. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of Emily's guest bed, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Standing up to Thomas, speaking my truth without cushioning it. These were foreign experiences, thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, my first communication from him since I'd left Connecticut. Mom? What's going on? Dad says you're having some kind of breakdown. I stared at the screen, hurt by his immediate assumption that I must be mentally unstable rather than legitimately dissatisfied. Had I raised my son to be as dismissive of women's autonomy as his father? Before I could respond, another text arrived. Are you okay? Do you need anything? This small expression of concern softened my reaction. I typed back, I'm fine, sweetheart. Not a breakdown, a breakthrough. I'll explain when I see you. Daniel's reply was swift. I'm coming to Boston this weekend. Let's talk then. I hadn't expected this development, but perhaps I should have. Daniel had always been protective of me, even as he emulated his father in many ways. The thought of seeing my son both comforted and unnerved me. Would he recognize the changes in me? Would he support this evolution, or try to coax me back into my familiar role? That evening, as I helped Emily prepare dinner for the twins, my daughter surprised me with an observation. You know, Mom, I think this is the longest conversation we've ever had about your needs and feelings. I looked up from the vegetables I was chopping. What do you mean? Emily measured rice into a pot, precise as always. Growing up, whenever we talked, it was always about Dad's work or my school or Daniel's sports. Your life seemed to exist only in relation to us. I don't think I ever asked what you wanted, and you never volunteered it. Her insight struck me with the force of revelation. She was right. I had so thoroughly absorbed the idea that a good mother subsumes her own identity into her family's that I'd never thought to share my separate self with my children. I didn't want to burden you, I admitted. Emily turned to face me fully. Mom, knowing who you are, your hopes, your disappointments, your dreams, that's not a burden. That's a gift, one I never realized I was missing until now. Tears pricked my eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be, she said firmly. Just don't disappear again, okay? No matter what happens with Dad, I want to know the real you. Later that night, I lay awake thinking about Emily's words, about Thomas's assumptions, about the life I'd built and the one I might yet create. In just 6 days away from my marriage, I'd begun to rediscover parts of myself long buried: my intellectual curiosity, my aesthetic sensibilities, my capacity for independent thought and action. What else might emerge if I gave myself more time and space? What other aspects of Margaret were waiting to be reclaimed? The question kept me awake well into the night, my mind racing with possibilities that had seemed unimaginable just a week ago. For 40 years, I had been living in a house built to someone else's specifications. Now, for the first time, I was considering what it might mean to design my own. Daniel arrived in Boston on Saturday morning, earlier than I'd expected. When Emily opened her apartment door, he stood there with an overnight bag and a worried expression that immediately softened into surprise when he saw me. "Mom?" He stepped forward, taking in my new appearance with wide eyes. At 36, Daniel was the spitting image of Thomas in his younger days, tall and broad-shouldered, with the same confident stance and analytical gaze. "You look different." I smiled, accepting his awkward hug. "That was the general idea. Dad didn't mention." He trailed off, glancing around as if seeking an explanation for this unfamiliar version of his mother. Emily rolled her eyes. "Of course he didn't. The twins are at soccer. Come in and stop hovering in the doorway like a delivery person." The three of us settled in Emily's living room, an echo of countless family gatherings over the years, but with the dynamics subtly shifted. For the first time, I wasn't bustling around serving everyone, ensuring their comfort before my own. Instead, Emily brought coffee for all of us, then sat beside me on the sofa, a small gesture of solidarity that didn't escape Daniel's notice. "So," he began, setting down his cup, "what's going on? Dad says you walked out on him." "I needed some time to think," I replied calmly. "After 40 years, I'd say I'm entitled to that." Daniel frowned. "He said it started over some comment about your appearance. Is that true?" "That was the catalyst," I acknowledged. "But the issues go much deeper and have been building for years." "What issues? You and Dad always seemed fine." I studied my son's genuinely confused expression. Of course we had seemed fine to him. I had made certain of it, smoothing over conflicts, swallowing disappointments, maintaining the facade of domestic harmony at all costs. "Daniel, your father and I have been living parallel lives for a very long time. He pursues his interests, his friends, his pleasures, and I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I facilitate. I exist to make his life comfortable and convenient, not as a full partner with needs and desires of my own." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "That's how marriage works, isn't it? Compromises, different roles." "Compromise suggests both people adjusting," I pointed out gently. "What I'm describing is one-sided accommodation," Emily interjected, her doctor's precision cutting through emotional ambiguity. "When was the last time Dad made any sacrifice for Mom's happiness? Can you think of a single example?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched, becoming its own answer. "Look," he finally said, "I'm not saying Dad's perfect. He can be self-absorbed, tactless, but he's not a bad person. He loves you in his way." "In his way," I echoed. "That's precisely the issue. His way requires me to be an accessory to his life, not the protagonist of my own." My son's expression was troubled. "So what are you saying? You want a divorce after 40 years? The word hung in the air between us. Divorce. I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead, focusing instead on the immediate process of rediscovery. But Daniel's direct question forced me to confront the logical conclusion of my journey. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "What I do know is that I can't go back to being invisible." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, Thomas's gesture when frustrated. "This seems so extreme. Couldn't you just talk to him?" Tell him you're unhappy? I have, I said simply. Many times. Over many years. He listens, promises to change. And within days, everything reverts to exactly as it was. Emily nodded. That tracks. Dad's never been big on introspection or behavioral change. So that's it? Daniel looked between us, bewildered. 40 years of marriage, and you're just walking away? I haven't decided anything permanently, I reminded him. I'm taking time to rediscover who I am outside of my roles as wife and mother. Is that really so unreasonable? Daniel seemed to struggle with this concept. But you're not just wife and mother, you're mom. That's who you are. His words struck me like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they revealed how completely I had allowed myself to be defined by my relationship to others, even in my children's eyes. I was Margaret Wheeler before I was anyone's wife or mother, I said quietly. I had dreams, ambitions, a self. Somewhere along the way, I lost touch with that person. I need to find her again. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. And we should support that. Right, Daniel? My son looked torn, loyalty to his father warring with love for me. I just don't want you to make a rash decision you'll regret. Family is important. Yes, it is, I agreed. Which is why I hope you can try to understand what I'm doing, even if it doesn't make sense to you right now. After Daniel left to visit friends in the city, promising to return for dinner, Emily turned to me with a thoughtful expression. He'll come around, she assured me. Daniel's always been more traditional than me, more like Dad in his worldview. This is challenging his assumptions. I nodded, grateful for her insight. I never wanted to come between you and your father, or to force you to take sides. We're adults, Mom. We can form our own opinions. Emily smiled wryly. Besides, as a doctor, I'm trained to look at evidence, and the evidence clearly shows you've been fading away for years. This, she gestured to my transformed appearance, is like watching a patient recover after a long illness. Her medical metaphor struck a chord. Perhaps I had been ill in a way, slowly dying from lack of recognition, respect, and reciprocity. That evening, after a surprisingly pleasant family dinner where we carefully avoided discussing my marriage, Daniel pulled me aside as he was leaving. I talked to Dad earlier, he admitted. He's really struggling with this, Mom. The house is a mess. He's eating takeout every night. He doesn't know what to do with himself. I felt a familiar tug of responsibility, the instinct to rush back and fix everything, make Thomas comfortable again, resume my role as the invisible supportive force in his life. But alongside that reflex was a newer, stronger voice, urging me to stand firm. He's a capable adult, I reminded Daniel and myself. He can figure it out. He misses you. My son's voice softened, appealing to my emotions. He said the house doesn't feel like home without you. The words were meant to move me, to awaken my nurturing instincts. Instead, they crystallized, something I'd been feeling since leaving Meadowbrook Estates. That's because I was the home, Daniel. I created the warmth, the comfort, the sense of welcome. And I did it for decades without reciprocation or recognition. I touched his arm gently. It's not wrong for me to need something in return. Daniel sighed, clearly torn. What can I tell him? Tell him I'm safe. Tell him I'm well. And tell him that when I'm ready, we'll talk about what happens next. After 9 days in Boston, I felt restless. Emily's apartment, while lovely, wasn't mine. I was still living in someone else's space, adjusting to someone else's rhythms. If I was serious about rediscovering myself, I needed a place where I could be fully autonomous. Lillian called, as if sensing my thoughts. How's the metamorphosis? Coming along? She asked cheerfully. I laughed, settling onto the balcony with my phone. Moving slowly but steadily, though I'm starting to feel like I'm imposing on Emily. So come back, Lillian suggested. Not to Thomas, obviously, but to Connecticut. I still have that guest cottage on my property that I've been meaning to renovate. It's small but private, with its own entrance. You could stay there while figuring out your next steps. The offer was tempting. Returning to Fairfield would mean confronting Thomas more directly, but it would also allow me to maintain my newfound independence while staying close to familiar surroundings. What would the rent be? I asked. Practical even in my rebellion. Lillian scoffed. Consider it an investment in feminist liberation. Though if you insist on contributing, you can help me with the garden redesign I've been planning. Your aesthetic? Sense is better than mine. After discussing it with Emily, who seemed relieved that I had a plan beyond indefinitely occupying her guest room, I booked a train ticket back to Connecticut. The night before my departure, Emily presented me with a gift, a sleek new smartphone to replace my outdated model. It has a better camera, she explained, so you can document your new adventures. And I've set up all the apps you might need: banking, ride services, social media. I was touched by her thoughtfulness and by the recognition that my journey was just beginning, not ending. Thank you, sweetheart. I've learned more about you in the past week than in the previous decade, Emily said quietly. I don't want to lose that connection again. The train ride back to Connecticut felt different from my journey to Boston. Then I had been fleeing in confusion and hurt. Now I was returning with purpose and a clearer sense of self. The landscape outside my window was familiar, but I viewed it through new eyes, not as background scenery to someone else's story, but as the setting for my own unfolding narrative. Lillian met me at the Fairfield station, her vintage convertible, standing out among the sensible sedans in the parking lot. Welcome back, Rebel, she called, helping me load my now substantial luggage into the trunk. As we drove through town, I felt a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of running into Thomas or neighbors who might report back to him. But Lillian, ever perceptive, took a circuitous route that avoided Meadowbrook Estates entirely. Her property sat on 2 acres at the edge of town, a rambling Victorian house surrounded by gardens that reflected her eclectic personality. Behind the main house, partly obscured by mature maple trees, stood the guest cottage, a compact structure, with a charming porch and freshly painted blue door. It's basic, Lillian warned as she unlocked it. But the essentials work. Heat, water, electricity. I had the bathroom updated last year, and there's decent Wi-Fi that reaches from the main house. Inside, the cottage was indeed simple but inviting. One large room functioning as living space, dining area, and kitchenette, plus a separate bedroom and bathroom. Large windows let in abundant natural light, and someone, Lillian, obviously, had placed fresh flowers in a vase on the small dining table. It's perfect, I declared, already envisioning how I might make the space my own. The fridge is stocked with basics, Lillian added, and I've left you a bottle of wine to celebrate your independence. Now, get settled, rest, and tomorrow we'll figure out next steps in Operation Metamorphosis. Alone in the cottage that evening, I experienced a moment of doubt. Not about leaving Thomas, but about my capacity to truly change after decades of subordinating my identity to others. What if this transformation was merely superficial, limited to my appearance rather than extending to my core self? I pushed the thought aside and focused on arranging my new clothes in the modest closet, setting up my new phone, transforming the cottage into a space that reflected the emerging Margaret rather than the fading Mrs. Winters. The next morning, I awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the distant sound of birdsong. For a disorienting moment, I reached for Thomas, then remembered where I was and why. Instead of the usual rush of morning obligations, preparing Thomas's breakfast, tidying the house, planning dinner, I felt a novel sense of open possibility. The day was mine to shape however I wished. I made coffee in the tiny kitchenette and carried it onto the porch, savoring the simple pleasure of an unhurried morning. From this vantage point, I could just see the rear of Lillian's house, but was shielded from the road by trees and shrubs. A private space within a supportive proximity, exactly what I needed. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Daniel. Says you're back in Connecticut. We need to talk." I stared at the message, considering my response. In the past, I would have immediately accommodated his demand, rearranging my plans to suit his schedule. Now, I took a deep breath and typed, "Yes, we do. I'll contact you when I'm ready." His reply was swift and predictable. "This isn't a negotiation, Margaret. You're my wife. You can't just disappear, then reappear on your terms." I felt a flicker of the old anxiety, the fear of displeasing him, of disrupting the fragile peace of our household. But beneath that familiar response was a newer, stronger emotion, righteous anger. "Actually, Thomas, I can. And I am." I pressed send before I could second-guess myself. The phone remained silent after that, but I knew the conversation was far from over. Thomas had never responded well to having his authority challenged, especially by me. Sooner or later, he would escalate. Lillian arrived mid-morning with pastries from a local bakery and boundless enthusiasm for my next steps. "You've done the external makeover," she noted, settling into one of the cottage's 2 armchairs. "Now it's time for the internal one. What did you love doing before marriage and motherhood consumed your life?" I considered the question. I was studying art history in college when I met Thomas. I wanted to work in a museum someday. And what happened to that dream? I shrugged. Thomas was starting his career. We needed stability, a regular income. Museum jobs were competitive, poorly paid. It seemed impractical. "And now?" Lillian pressed. "Is it still impractical?" "I'm 63, I reminded her. "No one's going to hire me without experience or an advanced degree." Lillian's expression was skeptical. "So get experience. Volunteer at a museum. Take classes. You're not dead, Margaret, and you're not exactly destitute, are you?" She was right. Between my inheritance and the joint savings I shared with Thomas, which I had every right to access, I had resources many women in my position would envy. The limitations I perceived were largely self-imposed, remnants of an identity built around sacrifice and practicality. "The Fairfield Art Museum has a volunteer docent program," I mused, remembering a flyer I'd seen months ago but dismissed, as irrelevant to my life. "And Westport Community College offers continuing education courses." Lillian beamed. "Now you're thinking. What else? What other interests have you set aside?" As we talked, more forgotten passions emerged. My love of gardening beyond the bow. Tidy suburban landscaping Thomas preferred, my interest in architectural photography, even my college participation in community theater. "You see?" Lillian said triumphantly. "The real Margaret has been there all along, just waiting for permission to reemerge." By the end of our conversation, I had a tentative plan. Inquire about the docent program, enroll in an art history course for the fall semester, explore photography classes at the local art center. Small steps toward reclaiming passions I'd abandoned decades ago. That afternoon, I drove Lillian's car to the Fairfield Art Museum, a modest institution housed in a converted historic mansion. With my new appearance and newfound confidence, I found it surprisingly easy to approach the volunteer coordinator about the docent program. "We're always looking for dedicated volunteers," she assured me, handing over an application. "Especially those with a genuine interest in art history. The training program starts next month." As I left the museum, application in hand, I experienced a surge of excitement I hadn't felt in years. The thrill of beginning something new, of expanding rather than contracting my world. On impulse, I stopped at a bookstore and purchased several art history texts to refresh my knowledge before the training began. Back at the cottage, I created a study space at the small dining table, arranging my books and a notebook with the same care I'd once devoted to preparing Thomas's home office. The difference, of course, was that this space was for me alone, my interests, my growth, my future. I was so absorbed in reading that I barely registered the approaching footsteps until a sharp knock on the door startled me. When I opened it, Thomas stood on the threshold, his expression a mixture of anger and bewilderment. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said, attempting to step inside. I blocked his entry, suddenly protective of this small sanctuary I was creating. "How did you find me?" "Fairfield isn't that big, Margaret. Someone saw you at the museum, then driving Lillian's car. It wasn't hard to connect the dots." His gaze traveled over my new appearance, taking in the stylish casual outfit, the sophisticated haircut. "You look different." "Yes," I agreed, simply. "I am different." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Can I come in? This isn't a conversation for doorways." After a moment's hesitation, I stepped aside. Thomas entered the cottage cautiously, as if entering foreign territory. In a way, he was. This space represented a version of me he had never known, or perhaps had forgotten existed. "Nice place," he commented insincerely, glancing around at the modest furnishings. "But don't you think this has gone on long enough? It's been almost 2 weeks." 2 weeks after 40 years, I pointed out. "I'd say I'm entitled to a bit more time." Thomas sighed heavily, adopting the patient tone he used when explaining something obvious to someone slow to understand. "Margaret, I know I hurt your feelings. And if my comment about your appearance was insensitive, I apologize. But this overreaction is becoming embarrassing. People are talking." "People are always talking," I replied calmly. "Why should that matter more than what I need?" "Because we have a life together." Thomas's composure slipped, revealing the frustration beneath. "A home, a position in the community, responsibilities. You can't just walk away from all that because of one argument." "It wasn't one argument, Thomas. It was the final straw after years of feeling insignificant in my own marriage." He shook his head dismissively. "That's ridiculous. You've always been central to our family." "As what? A housekeeper? A social secretary? Background support for your success?" The words flowed more easily now, practiced during my days of reflection. "When was the last time you asked about my dreams, my needs, my happiness?" Thomas looked genuinely confused. "Your happiness? I thought you were happy. We have a beautiful home, financial security, successful children. What more could you want?" His incomprehension was almost worse than deliberate cruelty. After 40 years, he truly didn't see me as a separate person with independent desires and ambitions. "I want to matter," I said quietly. "Not as an extension of you, but as myself. I want reciprocity, to receive care and attention in proportion to what I give. I want to be seen, Thomas." He ran a hand through his silver hair, visibly struggling to process my words. "I see you, Margaret. I've always seen you." "No," I corrected gently. "You've seen what I do for you, not who I am." Thomas's expression hardened. "And who exactly are you, with your new clothes and haircut?" Because the Margaret I married understood commitment and responsibility. She didn't abandon her family over some midlife identity crisis. The dismissiveness of his response confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Thomas wasn't capable of seeing me as anything other than an accessory to his life. My growth threatened him precisely because it challenged his position at the center of our shared universe. "I haven't abandoned anyone," I said firmly. "I'm right here trying to have an honest conversation about our marriage." "You're the one who can't seem to hear me." "What do you want from me?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising. "To suddenly become someone else after 40 years? To start acting like one of those sensitive New Age husbands from your romance novels?" I shook my head, sadness washing over me. I want you to care enough to try, to recognize that our marriage has been profoundly unbalanced, and to be willing to create something more equitable moving forward. Thomas's jaw tightened. So this is an ultimatum? Change or else? It's an invitation, I corrected, to grow together rather than continuing as we have been. But yes, I suppose it is conditional. I won't go back to invisibility, Thomas. Not for you, not for anyone. We stared at each other across the small room, the distance between us far greater than the physical space would suggest. 40 years of shared history, and yet in some fundamental way, we were strangers. Think carefully about what you're risking, Thomas finally said, his tone ominous. If you keep pushing this, you might not like where it leads. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You've built your entire life around our marriage. Are you really prepared to walk away from everything we've created together? The question hung in the air between us, weighty with implication. Was I prepared? The Margaret of 2 weeks ago would have faltered, retreated, sacrificed her emerging self on the altar of marital stability. But the woman standing in Lillian's cottage, surrounded by books and possibilities, hesitated. I don't know, I answered honestly. But I do know I can't continue as things were. Thomas's expression darkened. You'll regret this, Margaret. When the novelty wears off and you realize what you've thrown away, you'll regret it. He turned and strode to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I've been patient because I assumed this was temporary, a reaction to my thoughtless comment. But if you're serious about this, about us living separately, about fundamentally changing our marriage, then we need to discuss practical matters. Financial arrangements, the house, legal considerations. The abrupt shift to practicalities caught me off guard. Are you talking about divorce? I'm talking about consequences, Thomas replied coldly. You want independence? Fine. But independence works both ways. I won't keep financing this little adventure of self-discovery indefinitely. With that parting shot, he left, the door closing firmly behind him. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unsteady. Thomas's visit had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Not because his arguments had merit. They were the predictable reactions of a man unused to having his authority questioned. But because they forced me to confront the potential costs of my transformation. If Thomas followed through on his implied threat to cut me off financially, how would I support myself? If he forced the issue of divorce, was I prepared for the legal battles that might ensue? If neighbors and friends took his side, could I withstand the social isolation? For a dizzying moment, I considered capitulation, returning to Meadowbrook Estates, resuming my role as Mrs. Thomas Winters, accepting the limitations of that identity in exchange for security and familiarity. Then my gaze fell on the art history, books spread across the table, tangible evidence of a self I was reclaiming. I thought of the museum docent application, the community college catalog I'd been browsing, the photography classes I wanted to explore. Small seeds of possibility, but mine. The cottage door opened again, and Lillian peeked in cautiously. I saw Thomas storming off. Are you okay? I smiled weakly, defining okay broadly, yes. She stepped inside, assessing me with shrewd eyes. He tried to intimidate you into coming home. More or less, I confirmed, with hints about financial consequences if I don't. Lillian snorted derisively. Classic power play. When persuasion fails, resort to threats. She settled into the chair opposite mine. So, what's your plan? I don't know, I admitted. I'm not sure I'm equipped for the kind of battle Thomas might wage if I push this further. Nonsense, Lillian declared. You've survived 40 years married to that man. You're stronger than you realize. She leaned forward intently. Besides, you're not alone in this. You have me, Emily, even Daniel once he comes around. And any lawyer worth their salt would ensure you get your fair share after a 40-year marriage. Her confidence bolstered mine. You're right. I've spent too long avoiding conflict, especially with Thomas. But this matters enough to fight for. That's the spirit, Lillian approved. Now let's talk strategy. Thomas clearly thinks he can frighten you into submission with vague threats about money. We need to show him you're not as vulnerable as he assumes. By the time Lillian left that evening, we had outlined a practical approach to my newfound independence, opening a separate bank account for my inheritance, consulting a lawyer about my rights regarding the marital assets, exploring part-time job opportunities to supplement my income if necessary. Alone again, I returned to my art history books, but found my concentration broken by the day's confrontation. Thomas's visit had clarified something important. This wasn't just about reclaiming my identity, it was about renegotiating power in a relationship that had been fundamentally unequal for decades. The question now was whether Thomas could adapt to a more balanced dynamic, or if our marriage had been built on a foundation that couldn't sustain such transformation. Only time would tell, and for the first time in 40 years, I found myself willing to wait for an answer that served my needs, not just his. The days following Thomas's visit settled into a new rhythm. Each morning, I woke in Lillian's cottage with a sense of possibility that had been absent from my life for decades. I spent my mornings studying art history, refreshing knowledge that had lain dormant since college. Afternoons were often dedicated to practical matters, opening my own bank account, transferring my inheritance, consulting with a lawyer Lillian recommended about my rights in a marriage that might be ending. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, explained Miranda Chen, a divorce attorney with a reputation for representing women in my situation. After a 40-year marriage, you're entitled to a significant portion of the marital assets, regardless of who earned the income. I winced at the term divorce, still not entirely comfortable with the finality it suggested. I haven't decided to end my marriage, I clarified. I'm just trying to understand my options. Miranda nodded, her expression compassionate but practical. Many of my clients begin this way, but it's wise to be prepared, especially if your husband is already making financial threats. She guided me through the potential process, the division of property, alimony considerations, how retirement accounts might be handled. The information was simultaneously empowering and overwhelming. After decades of financial dependency, the prospect of managing my own affairs was daunting. What about the house? I asked, thinking of the colonial and Meadowbrook estates that had been my project and pride for 20 years. It depends, Miranda replied. Do you want to keep it? Many women in your position find that maintaining the marital home becomes both a financial and emotional burden. Her question caught me off guard. Did I want the house? I had poured countless hours into making it perfect, selecting paint colors, choosing furniture, tending gardens that Thomas barely noticed. But was it truly home, or simply the backdrop? For a role I was outgrowing? I'm not sure, I admitted. It's filled with memories, but also with reminders of who I was expected to be. Miranda smiled understandingly. There's no rush to decide. For now, just remember that you have rights. Don't let your husband pressure you into hasty decisions about your future. As I drove back to the cottage in Lillian's borrowed car, I pondered Miranda's advice. For most of my adult life, I had deferred to Thomas on major decisions, assuming his judgment was superior to mine. Now I was learning to trust my own instincts, to weigh options based on my needs rather than everyone else's. The volunteer coordinator at the Fairfield Art Museum called to inform me that my application had been accepted. Training would begin. The following month, 3 weekends of intensive instruction followed by supervised tours before I could lead groups on my own. We're especially interested in your art history background, she told me. Even if it's been a while, that foundation is valuable. The validation of my long-dormant education sent a thrill through me. Perhaps the years spent prioritizing others' achievements hadn't completely erased my own potential after all. Evenings often found Lillian and me sharing dinner, trading stories and insights. Unlike my conversations with Thomas, which had devolved into parallel monologues about separate concerns, these exchanges were genuine dialogues, ideas building upon ideas, perspectives shifting through mutual influence. "You should consider taking a photography class at the art center," Lillian suggested one evening, noticing how I framed my phone camera for artful shots of her garden. "You have a natural eye for composition." The idea took root, and by week's end, I had enrolled in a basic digital photography course. The instructor, Jacob, was an energetic 30-something with contagious enthusiasm for his craft. "Photography isn't about expensive equipment," he assured the class of mostly retirees. "It's about really seeing, the world around you. Finding beauty and meaning in ordinary moments." His words resonated beyond their immediate context. Wasn't that exactly what I was doing in my life now? Learning to see anew, to find meaning beyond the narrow parameters I'd accepted for so long? Each day brought small discoveries, artistic techniques I'd forgotten, local places I'd never explored despite living nearby for decades, aspects of my personality that had been submerged beneath layers of accommodation and compromise. I still received daily texts from Thomas, their tone oscillating between conciliatory, "I miss you," and threatening, "You need to come home and end this nonsense." I responded selectively, engaging when he seemed genuinely reflective, maintaining boundaries when he reverted to demands or manipulation. Emily called regularly, offering both emotional support and practical advice. "Dad came to Boston for a business meeting," she reported one evening. "He stopped by the apartment afterward." My heart quickened. What did he want? "To talk about you, obviously. He seems genuinely confused, Mom, like he can't comprehend why his perfect wife suddenly developed opinions and needs." I sighed, unsurprised but still disappointed. Did he express any understanding at all? "Actually, yes," Emily said, surprising me. "In his own way. He admitted he's taken you for granted, that he's never been particularly attentive to your feelings. He even acknowledged that his comment about your appearance was cruel." A flicker of hope kindled in my chest. "Do you think he's capable of real change?" Emily hesitated. "I don't know. He seemed sincere in the moment, but then he immediately pivoted to complaining about how difficult his life is without you. The house is a mess. He can't find anything. He's eating poorly." The familiar pattern deflated my momentary optimism. Even Thomas's attempts at insight quickly reverted to self-centered concerns. His discomfort, his inconvenience, his needs. "He misses having a housekeeper," I observed dryly, "not a wife." "That's harsh, Mom," Emily replied, though I could hear the reluctant agreement in her voice. But maybe not entirely wrong. 3 weeks into my residence at Lillian's cottage, Daniel arrived unannounced on a Sunday afternoon. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight as he stood on the small porch. "Dad asked me to talk to you," he admitted without preamble. "He's worried you're being influenced by Lillian, making decisions you'll regret." I stepped aside to let him enter. "I'm 63 years old, Daniel. I think I can discern my own mind by now." My son surveyed the cottage, the art books, stacked on the table, the camera I'd purchased for my photography class, the colorful throw pillows I'd added to make the space more vibrant. "You seem different here." "I feel different," I confirmed. "More present, more alive." Daniel sank into one of the armchairs, his expression troubled. "Dad's not doing well, Mom. The house is a disaster. He's eating takeout every night. He barely sleeps." The familiar weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, the instinct to rush in and fix everything, to sacrifice my needs for others. Comfort, I recognized it now for what it was, a deeply ingrained pattern that had gradually erased my personhood. "I'm sorry he's struggling," I said carefully. "But Thomas is a capable adult. He managed when he traveled for business. He can figure out how to load a dishwasher and make a sandwich." Daniel looked shocked at my response. "This isn't just about housework. He misses you. He loves you." "Does he?" I asked softly. "Or does he love what I do for him?" My son flinched as if I'd struck him. "That's unfair." "Is it? Think about it objectively, Daniel. When was the last time your father demonstrated love for me as a person, not as a function in his life?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched between us, filled with decades of unexamined assumptions. "He's willing to change," he finally offered. "He told me he realizes he's taken you for granted. He says he'll do whatever it takes to make things right." I had heard similar promises throughout my marriage, earnest in the moment, quickly, forgotten when the crisis passed. Still, a small part of me wanted to believe transformation was possible, not just for me, but for Thomas as well. "I appreciate you telling me this," I said honestly. "But if Thomas is serious about change, he needs to demonstrate it through actions, not just words relayed through our children." Daniel nodded slowly, his initial defensiveness softening. "He mentioned counseling. Said he'd be willing to try if you are." This was new. Thomas had always dismissed therapy as pointless talking whenever I'd suggested it during rough patches in our marriage. His willingness now suggested either genuine desire for reconciliation or desperation to restore the status quo. Perhaps both. "I'll think about it," I promised. After Daniel left, I sat on the cottage porch, watching twilight settle over Lillian's garden. The possibility of marriage counseling with Thomas stirred complex emotions: hope that genuine connection might still be possible, fear that I'd be drawn back into old patterns of self-erasure, uncertainty about whether our relationship could evolve after decades of calcified habits. That evening, I texted Thomas directly. "Daniel mentioned you're open to counseling. Is that true?" His response came quickly. "Yes. Whatever it takes to fix this." I considered his words carefully. Not fix this like a broken object. Transform it into something healthier for both of us. There was a longer pause before his reply. "I don't know what that means exactly, but I'm willing to try." It wasn't a profound insight into relational dynamics, but from Thomas, it represented an unprecedented willingness to step into unknown territory. For the first time since leaving, I felt a tentative hope that our marriage might evolve rather than simply end. The next morning, I called a therapist Lillian had recommended, Dr. Eliza Warren, who specialized in couples navigating major transitions in long-term relationships. "I can see you and your husband this Thursday at 4, the receptionist offered after taking my information. Thursday. Just 3 days away. The immediacy made this theoretical exploration suddenly concrete. "That would be fine," I heard myself say, heart racing with nervous anticipation. After scheduling the appointment, I texted Thomas the details, half expecting him to find an excuse to delay. Instead, he confirmed immediately, "I'll be there." I spent the intervening days in an emotional tug-of-war, hopeful that therapy might open new possibilities, fearful that I'd be pressured to compromise my emerging self for the sake of marital harmony. During my photography class, I found it difficult to concentrate, my mind rehearsing what I might say to Thomas, how I would articulate my needs without sounding accusatory or bitter. "You seem distracted today," Jacob commented as we reviewed our practice shots. "Your compositions are technically correct, but missing the emotional connection you usually bring." His observation startled me. I had been so focused on my internal struggle that I'd approached photography mechanically, rather than intuitively. "I have a lot on my mind," I admitted. "A difficult conversation coming up." Jacob nodded, understanding. Photography can actually help with that. When we're overwhelmed by emotions or thoughts, the camera lens can provide useful distance, a way to frame experience, to see it more clearly. His advice stayed with me as Thursday approached. Could I view my marriage with Thomas through a similar lens, with enough distance to see patterns clearly, but enough engagement to capture its emotional truth? The day of our appointment arrived with unsettling swiftness. I dressed carefully, in one of my new outfits, a tailored navy dress that conveyed quiet confidence, rather than the accommodating softness that had characterized my wardrobe for decades. Lillian had offered to drive me, but I decided to take her car alone, needing the solitude to gather my thoughts. Dr. Warren's office was located in a converted Victorian house near the town center. I arrived 15 minutes early, parking beneath a sprawling oak tree that dappled Lillian's convertible with shifting shadows. Thomas's silver Lexus was already in the small lot, an unusual punctuality that signaled either eagerness or anxiety. The waiting room was empty when I entered, suggesting Thomas had already been escorted inside. The receptionist, a young man, with kind eyes, smiled reassuringly. "Dr. Warren is ready for you, Mrs. Winters. Your husband just arrived." Mrs. Winters. The title I had worn like a second skin for 40 years now felt strangely ill-fitting, like clothes I had outgrown. I followed the receptionist down a short hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. The therapy room was warmly lit, with comfortable seating arranged to facilitate conversation. Thomas stood as I entered, his expression unreadable. He looked older somehow, the lines around his eyes more pronounced, his posture less commanding. For a disorienting moment, I saw him as a stranger might, not the domineering figure who had shaped my existence for decades, but simply an aging man, uncertain and vulnerable. "Margaret," he said, his voice catching slightly. "You look... well?" Before I could respond, Dr. Warren gestured toward the seating arrangement. "Please, make yourselves comfortable." She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps in her 40s, with a calm presence and attentive gaze. "I'd like to start by thanking both of you for being here. It takes courage to examine a relationship, especially one with as much history as yours." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, clearly out of his element. In boardrooms and business negotiations, he was commanding, authoritative. Here, those qualities held no particular currency. "Let's begin with understanding what brings you to therapy at this point," Dr. Warren continued. "Margaret, since you made the appointment, would you like to share your perspective first?" I took a deep breath, organizing thoughts I'd rehearsed countless times. After 40 years of marriage, I realized I'd gradually disappeared. Not physically, obviously, but as a person with distinct needs, desires, and identity. I left because I needed space to rediscover who I am outside of my roles as wife, mother, and homemaker. Dr. Warren nodded encouragingly. "And what precipitated this realization? Was there a specific event?" "On our anniversary, Thomas made a comment about my appearance, that I'd let myself go. But that was just the catalyst. The issues go much deeper and have developed over decades," Thomas interjected, his tone defensive. "It was one thoughtless remark. I've apologized for it. I don't understand how that justifies walking out on a 40-year marriage." Dr. Warren turned to him gently. "Thomas, I hear your frustration. Could you share your understanding of what's happening in your relationship?" Thomas ran a hand through his silver hair, visibly struggling. "Honestly, I'm completely baffled. We had what I thought was a good life together. A beautiful home, financial security, successful children. Then Margaret gets a new haircut, buys some clothes, and suddenly our entire marriage is inadequate?" The dismissiveness in his tone stirred familiar hurt, but I remained silent, allowing Dr. Warren to guide the conversation. "It sounds like there's a fundamental disconnect in how you each view your relationship," she observed. "Thomas, When Margaret describes feeling invisible or diminished in the marriage, how does that land for you? Thomas frowned. It's hard to understand. Margaret has always been the center of our home, the person everyone depended on. How could someone so essential feel invisible? His words revealed the very paradox I had struggled to articulate, being functionally central while personally peripheral. Essential as a role, invisible as a human being with unique needs and desires. Perhaps that's exactly the issue, Dr. Warren suggested. Being needed isn't the same as being seen. Margaret, does that resonate with your experience? Completely, I confirmed, grateful for her insight. I've been indispensable as a wife, mother, and homemaker, but rarely acknowledged as Margaret, a woman with dreams, opinions, and needs separate from those roles. Thomas looked genuinely perplexed. But those roles defined who we were together. I was the provider. You were the heart of our home. It worked for decades. It worked for you, I corrected gently, while I slowly disappeared. Dr. Warren intervened as tension mounted. Different relationship models work for different couples. The question isn't whether your arrangement was objectively right or wrong, but whether it still serves both of you. She turned to me. Margaret, what would a more fulfilling relationship look like to you now? I considered her question carefully, aware that my answer might determine whether reconciliation was possible. I need reciprocity, I began slowly. Equal consideration of my needs and desires, recognition of my personhood beyond what I contribute practically, and space to pursue interests and growth independently, not just in service to our family. Thomas's expression was troubled. That sounds like you want a completely different marriage than the one we've had for 40 years. Yes, I agreed simply. I do. Dr. Warren leaned forward slightly. Change can be threatening, especially in a long-established relationship. Thomas, what concerns you most about the changes Margaret is describing? My husband was silent for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. When he finally spoke, his voice was uncharacteristically subdued. I'm not sure I know how to be the husband she's describing. This new Margaret seems to want a completely different life. Where do I fit in that? His vulnerability surprised me. Behind the bluster and defensiveness was genuine fear, not just of losing the comforts and services I had provided, but perhaps of losing his place in my life altogether. That's a very honest question, Dr. Warren acknowledged, and one worth exploring. Margaret, how do you envision Thomas's role in your evolving identity? I hadn't expected this question, had been so focused on reclaiming myself that I hadn't fully considered what place Thomas might have in that reclamation. I don't know, I admitted. I know I can't go back to who I was. But I also recognize that 40 years creates a bond that isn't easily severed. I suppose I'm hoping we might grow together, find a new way of being partners that honors both our needs. Thomas looked up, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time since I'd entered the room. Do you still love me? The directness of his question caught me off guard. Did I? The answer wasn't as simple as it once might have been. I love the history we share, I said carefully. The family we created. And yes, there are parts of you I've always loved. Your determination, your intelligence, your occasional capacity for unexpected kindness. But I've been angry too, and hurt by years of feeling unimportant. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. I never meant to make you feel that way. I know, I acknowledged. That's part of the problem. You didn't see it happening because you didn't have to. Your comfort and convenience were always prioritized, so naturally, that seemed like the proper order of things. Dr. Warren interjected gently. This kind of insight is valuable, but can also trigger defensiveness. Thomas, I'm curious about your reaction to what Margaret is sharing. Thomas seemed to struggle internally, his instinct for self-justification. warring with a desire to understand. I want to say she's exaggerating, he admitted after a pause. That she's making me sound like some kind of tyrant when I was just being a normal husband. But, Dr. Warren encouraged. But I suppose I did take it for granted that her job was to make my life comfortable, that her needs were somehow secondary. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. I never thought about it in those terms before. This small acknowledgement felt monumental, a crack in the fortress of entitlement that had characterized our relationship for decades. Not a transformation, certainly, but perhaps its precondition. That awareness is significant, Dr. Warren affirmed. Often relationship patterns become so normalized that we stop seeing them clearly until something disrupts the status quo. She glanced at her watch. We're nearing the end of our time today, but I'd like to suggest a framework for moving forward, if you're both amenable. We nodded, and she continued. Margaret, you've taken a brave step in creating space to rediscover yourself. That process seems essential to your well-being and shouldn't be abandoned. Thomas, you're being asked to reconsider fundamental assumptions about your marriage, which is understandably challenging. She folded her hands on her notepad. I propose continuing with weekly sessions to explore these dynamics, while maintaining your current living arrangements for now. This gives Margaret the space she needs while allowing you both to work on redefining your relationship before making permanent decisions. It was a measured approach, neither rushing reconciliation nor foreclosing its possibility. I nodded agreement, and after a moment, Thomas did as well. One last thing, Dr. Warren added. I'd like each of you to reflect on what you value most about the other, not what they do for you, but who they are as people. Sometimes in long marriages, we forget to see the person behind the role. That recognition is essential for any meaningful path forward. As we left the office, Thomas and I stood awkwardly in the parking lot, the familiar intimacy of 40 years suddenly replaced by the tentative distance of near strangers. Your hair looks nice, he offered unexpectedly. The style suits you. The compliment was small but significant. Perhaps his first attempt to see me differently, to acknowledge the external manifestation of my internal changes. Thank you, I replied, surprised by the gesture. Would you like to get coffee somewhere? Thomas asked hesitantly. Just to talk outside of a therapist's office. I considered his invitation. Part of me wanted to retreat to the safety of Lillian's cottage, to process the session alone. But another part recognized the courage it had taken for Thomas to suggest this small step toward a different kind of connection. All right, I agreed. There's a cafe around the corner. We walked in silence, the spring afternoon unusually warm. The cafe was quiet, most of the after-work crowd not yet arrived. We found a table near the window, ordered our drinks, then sat facing each other with decades of history and a gulf of recent changes between us. I meant what I said in therapy, Thomas began awkwardly. I never intended to make you feel diminished. I know, I acknowledged. That's what made it so difficult to address. You weren't deliberately cruel, just consistently inattentive. He winced slightly. When you put it that way, it sounds terrible. It was, in its cumulative effect. I stirred my coffee, organizing my thoughts. Each individual instance seemed too small to protest. A dismissed opinion, an ignored request, a need deprioritized. But over 40 years, those small moments created a pattern of invisibility. Thomas was silent for a long moment, his expression troubled. I keep thinking about what you said, that I loved what you did for me, not who you are. It's been haunting me since Daniel told me about your conversation. I waited, giving him space to continue. The thing is, he said slowly, I'm not sure I know who you are anymore. The Margaret who left our house that day, who's sitting across from me now, she's different from the woman I've lived with for decades. His observation was perceptive, if incomplete. Or perhaps she's always been there, just hidden beneath layers of accommodation and compromise. Thomas studied me across the table, as if seeing me anew. Maybe. But that raises another question. Do I even fit in this new version of your life? Do you want me to? It was the central question, the one I had been circling since leaving Meadowbrook Estates. Did I want to salvage a transformed version of our marriage, or was I simply in the process of outgrowing it entirely? I don't know, I admitted honestly. I know I can't return to who I was or how we were. But 40 years creates bonds that aren't easily or painlessly severed. I suppose what I'm trying to determine is whether there's enough foundation, enough mutual respect and genuine care to build something new from the ruins of what broke. Thomas absorbed my words, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup as if seeking warmth. I miss you, he said simply. Not just what you did for me, though God knows the house is a disaster without you. I miss talking to you, hearing about your day, even your gentle nagging about my health. He attempted a small smile. That has to count for something, doesn't it? I felt an unexpected surge of tenderness for this man who had shaped so much of my life, for better and worse. It might, I conceded. If it's accompanied by a willingness to see me fully and engage with me equally. That's not a small adjustment after 40 years of established patterns. No, he agreed solemnly. It's not, but neither is walking away from 40 years of shared history. We sat in contemplative silence, each wrestling with the weight of past choices and future possibilities. No resolution, no dramatic reconciliation, just the quiet acknowledgement that whatever came next would require intention and effort from both of us. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cafe table, I realized something significant. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, Thomas and I were having a conversation that centered on my needs and feelings rather than his. It wasn't a transformation, not yet, but it was, perhaps, its beginning. The weeks following our first therapy session unfolded with cautious, halting steps toward understanding. Thomas and I continued meeting with Dr. Warren every Thursday afternoon, gradually excavating decades of assumptions that had structured our marriage. Outside those sessions, we established a new pattern. Occasional coffee meetings where we tried to talk as two people rather than as husband and wife performing established roles. Tell me something about yourself that I don't know, Thomas suggested during one such meeting, his expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The question caught me off guard. After 40 years together, what could possibly remain unknown between us? Yet, as I considered his request, I realized there were countless aspects of my inner life I had never shared. Dreams abandoned for practicality, opinions softened to avoid conflict, interests pursued only in the margins of my designated responsibilities. When I was young, before we met, I wanted to travel through Europe studying Renaissance art, I told him. Not just as a tourist, but deeply, spending months in Florence, Rome, Venice. I had even started learning Italian. Thomas's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. I had no idea. What happened to that plan? Life happened. Marriage, children, mortgage payments. It didn't seem important anymore. But it was important, he said slowly, as if working through a difficult equation. It was important to you. I nodded, unexpectedly moved by this small recognition. Yes, it was. Do you still want that? To see those places, study that art? The question opened something within me, permission to acknowledge desires I had packed away so thoroughly I had almost forgotten they existed. Yes, I admitted, though differently now. I'm not 23 anymore, with a young person's romantic notions. But I still want to stand before those paintings, to see with my own eyes what I've only studied in books. Thomas was quiet for a moment, absorbing this revelation. "We could go," he offered tentatively, "to Italy. Not as a quick fix for everything, but because it matters to you." His suggestion surprised me, not just the offer itself, but the motivation behind it. Not as a gesture to appease me or to restore the status quo, but as recognition of something intrinsically significant to my personhood. "Perhaps," I allowed, "but not yet. There are things I need to resolve here first." Our weekly therapy sessions continued, sometimes productive, other times devolving into old patterns of Thomas's defensiveness and my accommodation. Dr. Warren was skilled at identifying these regressions, helping us see how easily we slipped back into familiar dynamics. "Notice what just happened," she would say. Margaret expressed a need, Thomas became uncomfortable, and instead of maintaining her position, Margaret immediately softened it to reduce his discomfort. These observations were uncomfortable but necessary, illuminating habits so ingrained they felt like inevitable responses rather than choices. Gradually, we began developing new patterns, Thomas learning to listen without immediately problem-solving or dismissing, me practicing the art of stating needs without apology or excessive qualification. Meanwhile, my life beyond our marriage continued expanding. The docent training at the art museum challenged and delighted me, awakening knowledge I had feared lost to decades of disuse. My photography class culminated in a small exhibition where 3 of my images were displayed alongside other students' work. I began taking a weekly yoga class, reconnecting with my physical self after years of treating my body as merely a vehicle for serving others. Lillian remained my steadfast supporter, alternately cheerleading my independence and cautioning against premature reconciliation. "Be careful," she warned after hearing about Thomas's Italy suggestion. "Men like him are masters of grand gestures when they feel their control slipping. The real test is whether he can sustain daily respect and consideration, not whether he can book a fancy trip." Her skepticism was a useful counterbalance to my own tendency toward optimism, especially where Thomas was concerned. It reminded me to look for sustained change, not momentary accommodations designed to restore the comfortable status quo. Emily and Daniel reacted differently to the ongoing evolution of their parents' relationship. Emily remained supportive of my transformation, though concerned about the emotional toll of the in-between state Thomas and I currently occupied, neither fully together nor definitively apart. "I just want you to be happy, Mom," she told me during one of our increasingly frequent phone calls, "whatever that looks like." Daniel, ever the practical one, focused on logistics and outcomes. "Are you and Dad working things out or not?" he asked bluntly during a visit to the cottage. "This limbo can't go on indefinitely." "Relationships aren't binary, Daniel," I replied, surprising myself with the philosophical turn. "We're figuring out whether we can create something new together, or whether we need to respectfully end what no longer serves either of us." He shook his head, not entirely satisfied but willing to accept my answer for now. As summer bloomed into its full glory, I found myself increasingly torn about my living situation. Lillian's cottage had provided precisely the sanctuary I needed during my initial separation from Thomas, but it remained borrowed space, temporary by definition. The question of a more permanent arrangement loomed larger with each passing week. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," Lillian assured me when I broached the subject. "But I understand the desire for roots, for something that's truly yours." Her words crystallized a growing realization. Whatever happened with Thomas, I needed a space that was unambiguously mine, a physical manifestation of my reclaimed autonomy. The solution emerged unexpectedly during a museum board meeting I attended as part of my docent training. Amelia Bartlett, the museum's elderly director, mentioned casually that she was moving to Arizona to be closer to her grandchildren. "I hate to sell my carriage house," she confided during a break. "It's been my sanctuary for 20 years, but it's time for a change." My interest piqued. "Carriage house?" "A converted one, behind a Victorian on Maple Street. It's small, but perfect for a single person. Open floor plan downstairs, bedroom and bath upstairs, lovely garden. I've completely renovated it over the years. As she described the property, something stirred within me, a vision of a space that could be wholly mine, reflecting my emerging identity rather than accommodating others' expectations. "Is it on the market yet?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Amelia shook her head. "Not officially. I've been dreading the whole process. Realtors, open houses, strangers tramping through my personal space." I took a deep breath. "Would you consider a private sale? I might be interested." Her eyes widened, then crinkled with pleasure. "Margaret, that would be ideal. Why don't you come see it tomorrow?" The carriage house was everything Amelia had described and more. A 2-story brick structure bathed in natural light, with original wooden beams and modern amenities thoughtfully integrated. The main floor contained a kitchen that opened to a living and dining area, while the upstairs held a spacious bedroom, bathroom, and small study overlooking a garden lush with perennials and flowering shrubs. "It's perfect," I breathed, already envisioning my books on the built-in shelves, my new camera on the antique desk by the window, meals prepared in the kitchen not out of obligation, but for the simple pleasure of nourishing myself. Amelia named a price that seemed fair given the property's charm and condition. Without consulting Thomas, I made an offer, using my inheritance as a down payment and qualifying for a modest mortgage, based on the projected sale of my portion of our marital assets. The transaction proceeded with surprising swiftness, and, by early August, I had signed papers making the carriage house officially mine. Only then did I inform Thomas of my decision. We met at our usual cafe, the afternoon light casting dappled shadows across the table between us. I had rehearsed this conversation multiple times, anticipating his resistance or hurt, but determined to stand firm in my choice. "I've purchased a house," I announced without preamble. "A small carriage house near the museum." Thomas stared at me, coffee cup suspended halfway to his lips. "You bought property? Without discussing it with me?" "Yes," I confirmed calmly. "It's modest but perfect for my needs." He set his cup down carefully, his expression cycling, through surprise, confusion, and something that looked like fear. "This sounds permanent." "It's a commitment to myself," I clarified. "A space that's wholly mine, where I can continue discovering who I am beyond our marriage." "Are you filing for divorce then?" His voice was strained, almost strangled. I shook my head. "Not necessarily, but I am establishing independence, emotionally, physically, financially." "Using what money?" Thomas asked, his tone sharpening. "Our savings are joint." "My inheritance," I replied evenly. "The money my mother left me, which I kept separate. And I qualified for a mortgage on my own." This revelation seemed to shake him deeply. The concrete evidence that I had resources independent of him, that I had been planning autonomy in ways he hadn't imagined. "I see," he said finally. "And where does this leave us? Our therapy, our conversations, our 40 years together?" It was a fair question, one I had asked myself repeatedly while making this decision. "In transition," I answered honestly. "I don't know yet whether our marriage can evolve into something truly mutual, but I do know I can't make that determination, while still dependent on you or Lillian for basic needs like housing." Thomas was silent for a long moment, processing my words. When he spoke again, his tone was different, subdued, almost wistful. "I keep thinking I understand what's happening, and then you surprise me again. The Margaret I thought I knew would never have bought property independently." "Perhaps you never really knew me," I suggested gently. "Or perhaps I'm becoming someone new. Either way, this is who I am now. A woman who makes decisions based on her own needs and desires." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. When do you move in? Next week. Amelia, the seller, is leaving for Arizona on Friday. Do you need help? The offer was unexpected, a small crack in his pride. I considered declining, maintaining the boundary of complete independence. But something in his expression, a genuine desire to be useful, to participate in this transition even if it wasn't what he wanted, softened my resolve. Actually, yes, I admitted. I could use help moving some furniture from storage. His relief was visible, a concrete task he could perform, a tangible way to remain connected despite the growing distance between us. Just tell me when. Moving into the carriage house marked another milestone in my transformation. With each box unpacked, each piece of furniture arranged, each personal touch added, I felt more solidly anchored in my new reality. I selected items from our marital home with deliberate care, taking those with sentimental value or personal significance, leaving behind anything that merely represented obligation or convention. Thomas kept his promise to help, arriving on moving day with Daniel and a rented truck. They worked efficiently, carrying furniture and boxes, assembling shelves, hanging pictures according to my direction. It was strange seeing Thomas in this space, my space, his tall frame looking almost outsized among my carefully chosen furnishings. It suits you, he commented as we paused for lunch in the half-furnished living room. This place, it has character. The observation surprised me, not because it was inaccurate, but because it suggested he was seeing me more clearly than I had given him credit for. The carriage house did suit me. Its blend of historic charm and functional modernism, its intimate scale, its garden filled with plants chosen for beauty rather than conventional curb appeal. Thank you, I replied simply. I think so too. By late afternoon, the essentials were in place. Bed made, kitchen functional, books arranged on shelves, my new photography equipment set up in the study. As Daniel left to return the truck, Thomas lingered, his reluctance to leave palpable. Would you like to stay for dinner? I offered, recognizing his difficulty in saying goodbye. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad. His face brightened. I'd like that. Cooking in my new kitchen felt like a declaration, preparing food as a creative act rather than a duty, for shared enjoyment rather than service. We ate at the small table by the garden window, the evening light casting a golden glow across our simple meal. This reminds me of our first apartment, Thomas observed, glancing around the compact space. Before the children, before the promotions and bigger houses. Just the two of us in a place that was cozy rather than impressive. His comment stirred memories I hadn't accessed in years. The genuine partnership of our early marriage, before. Success had stratified our roles and calcified our expectations. Back then, we had shared cooking duties, laughed over mishaps, treated our modest home as an adventure rather than a stepping stone to something better. I remember, I said, softly. We were different people then. Thomas's expression grew thoughtful. Were we? Or did we just forget something essential along the way? It was an insightful question, one that cut to the heart of our current situation. Had success and comfort gradually corrupted a relationship that began with genuine mutual respect? Had we both participated in transforming an equal partnership into a hierarchical arrangement that diminished my personhood while inflating his sense of entitlement? Perhaps both, I suggested. We changed, and we forgot, or I forgot, that relationships require continuous renegotiation as individuals evolve. We talked late into the evening, reminiscing about our early years together, acknowledging the gradual shifts that had occurred as Thomas's career advanced and my world contracted, exploring whether fragments of our original connection might still exist beneath layers of accumulated grievance and habit. When Thomas finally prepared to leave, he paused at the door, his expression vulnerable in a way I rarely witnessed. Could I take you to dinner next week? A proper dinner at Salvatore's, like a... He hesitated, searching for the right word. Like a date? I suggested, amused by his awkwardness. Exactly, he agreed, looking relieved. A date. The request was simultaneously touching and complicated. Part of me recoiled at the idea of slipping back into couplehood before I had fully established my independent identity. But another part recognized that Thomas was making a genuine effort to approach our relationship differently, to see me as a person to be courted rather than a possession to be reclaimed. All right, I agreed cautiously, but just dinner. I'm not moving back to Meadowbrook Estates. One step at a time, he promised, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. After he left, I wandered through my new home, still marveling that this space was truly mine, a physical manifestation of the autonomy I had reclaimed. It wasn't grand or particularly luxurious, but it was authentic in a way our sprawling colonial had never been. Every object, every color, every arrangement reflected my aesthetic and practical preferences rather than social expectations or compromises. The following weeks established new rhythms for my transformed life. Mornings often found me in the garden, coffee in hand, planning the day's activities without reference to anyone else's needs or schedule. I led tour groups at the museum twice, weekly, discovering unexpected joy in sharing art history with curious visitors. My photography evolved from simple documentation to more intentional composition, each image reflecting my unique perspective on the world. Thomas and I continued our weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Warren, gradually establishing new patterns of communication and mutual respect. Our date at Salvatore's led to other outings, an exhibition at the museum where I now volunteered, a concert in the park, a weekend farmers market I had discovered near my new home. Slowly, cautiously, we were getting to know each other again, not as husband and wife with fixed roles and expectations, but as two distinct individuals exploring whether connection was still possible between the people we had become. You seem happy, Emily observed during a video call, her doctor's eyes assessing me even through the screen. More present, more vibrant. I am, I confirmed, realizing the truth of her observation. Not every moment, of course. There are still difficult days, uncertain futures to navigate. But overall, yes, I'm happier than I've been in years. And Dad? She asked, carefully, clearly trying to understand the current state of our relationship. I considered her question thoughtfully. He's trying, really trying, in ways I wouldn't have believed possible 6 months ago. Whether it's enough to build a new kind of marriage, I still don't know. But the effort itself is significant. Emily nodded, absorbing my assessment. What do you want, Mom? Ultimately, it was the central question, one I had been circling for months. What did I want for my future, now that I had reclaimed agency over my present? I want to remain autonomous. I began slowly, articulating feelings still taking shape. To continue discovering and expressing who I am beyond my roles as wife and mother. I want reciprocity in my relationships, giving and receiving care in equal measure. I want purpose that derives from my talents and passions, not just from being useful to others. And does Dad fit into that vision? I sighed, acknowledging the complexity of my feelings. Maybe. If he can truly accept me as I am now, not as he wishes I would remain. If we can create a relationship based on mutual respect, rather than traditional roles, it's still an open question. 2 months after moving into the carriage house, I received an unexpected delivery, a large flat package carefully wrapped in protective materials. Inside was a painting I recognized immediately, a study of Venice's Grand Canal that had caught my eye at a gallery opening Thomas and I had attended years ago. I had commented on its luminous quality, the way the artist had captured water and light with such delicacy. Thomas had nodded distractedly and moved on to the next room. A note accompanied the painting. I remembered. T. The gesture moved me deeply, not for its monetary value, but for what it represented. Thomas had been listening, even when I thought he wasn't. Some part of him had registered my aesthetic response and stored it away, retrieving it now as evidence that he saw me, heard me, recognized aspects of my personhood beyond my functional role in his life. I called to thank him, and our conversation led to another dinner, this time at my carriage house. I prepared a simple but elegant meal, and we ate in the garden, surrounded by late summer blooms and the gentle sound of the fountain I had installed as a gift to myself. I've been thinking, Thomas said as we lingered over dessert, about what you said months ago, that my comment about your appearance was just the catalyst for something that had been building for years. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. You were right. He met my eyes directly, something he had struggled to do during our earlier confrontations. I did take you for granted, assumed your needs were secondary to mine, expected you to arrange your entire existence around my comfort and convenience. The admission was startling in its clarity, free from the qualifications and defenses that had characterized his earlier attempts at understanding. What changed? I asked, genuinely curious about his evolution. Thomas considered the question carefully. Living alone, partly. Experiencing the daily reality of maintaining a household without you there to manage everything. But more than that, seeing you transform, watching you become more fully yourself, pursuing interests, making decisions, creating this new life. He gestured to the garden around us. It's forced me to recognize how much I limited you, how much I benefited from your smallness. His insight brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Not from hurt, but from the profound relief of being truly seen after decades of invisibility. I can't promise I'll never slip back into old patterns, Thomas continued. 40 years of entitlement aren't erased in 6 months of therapy. But I am committed to trying, to building something more equitable between us, if that's what you want too. I didn't answer immediately, giving his words the consideration they deserved. The Thomas sitting across from me was not the same man who had carelessly criticized my appearance on our anniversary morning. He had struggled, resisted, occasionally regressed, but ultimately engaged in genuine self-examination and growth. I appreciate your honesty, I said finally. And yes, I am open to building something new together, not by returning to our old dynamic, but by creating a relationship that honors both our needs and preserves the autonomy I've reclaimed. Thomas nodded, relief and determination mingling in his expression. How do we start? It was a good question, one without simple answers. How does a couple transform a 4-decade pattern of inequality into genuine partnership? How do two people who have occupied rigid roles find flexibility and mutuality? Slowly, I suggested. With intention and constant awareness, with the understanding that this is uncharted territory for both of us. We talked late into the evening, outlining a tentative path forward, continuing therapy, maintaining separate residences for now, while exploring new ways of being together, consciously, breaking patterns of dominance and accommodation when they emerged. As autumn painted the garden in rich golds and deep reds, Thomas and I established a careful balance, regular time together combined with the independence we both now recognized I needed. We attended cultural events I selected, dined at new restaurants, explored nearby towns neither of us had bothered to visit during our decades in Connecticut. Gradually, tentatively, we began rediscovering physical intimacy as well. Not through the perfunctory routine our sex life had become in later years, but through a more deliberate exploration, as if learning each other's bodies and desires anew. You're more confident, Thomas observed one evening as we lay together in my bedroom, the autumn light fading beyond the windows. More present in your body. I feel more entitled to pleasure, I acknowledged, to expressing desires rather than just accommodating yours. He traced patterns on my bare shoulder, his touch reverent in a way it hadn't been for years. I like it. I like you this way, fully embodied, fully yourself. His words warmed me, confirmation that our evolving relationship might actually be better, deeper, more authentic than what we had lost. 1 year after Thomas's careless comment triggered my transformation, we celebrated our 41st anniversary, not at home with a quiet dinner, but in Florence, standing before Botticelli's Birth of Venus in the Uffizi Gallery. The trip, a joint decision, jointly planned, represented both the fulfillment of my long-deferred dream and a new chapter in our reimagined relationship. "What do you see?" Thomas asked as we gazed at the iconic painting, genuinely interested. In my perspective, rather than merely tolerating what he once would have dismissed as irrelevant aesthetic appreciation, I described the revolutionary aspects of Botticelli's technique, the painting's complex symbolism, the cultural context that made it both traditional and radical. Thomas listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions, sharing his own observations, without attempting to dominate the conversation. Later, as we walked along the Arno River, Florence's ancient bridges glowing in the sunset, Thomas took my hand, a gesture both familiar and new in its undemanding tenderness. "I never thought our marriage could be better after a separation," he admitted. "I assumed we'd either return to what we had been or end completely. This in-between state, this transformation, wasn't something I could imagine." "Nor I agreed. But perhaps that's exactly what makes it valuable. We're creating something without precedent in our experience, something that requires continuous attention and intention rather than comfortable habit." Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm still learning how to balance independence with connection, how to be a partner rather than an owner, how to see your autonomy as enriching our relationship rather than threatening it. And I'm still learning how to maintain boundaries without building walls," I acknowledged. "How to share myself without surrendering myself." We continued walking, the historic city a fitting backdrop for our reflections on permanence and change, tradition, and innovation. Our marriage had not been saved in any conventional sense. The old patterns had indeed died, as they needed to. What emerged instead was something more conscious, more balanced, more authentic to who we had become. As we rounded a bend in the river, the last light of day illuminating Florence's timeless silhouette, I felt a profound sense of rightness, not because every question had been answered or every issue resolved, but because I had finally claimed the authority to determine my own path, to require reciprocity in my relationships, to exist fully in the world as myself rather than as an extension of others' needs. My transformation had begun with a physical makeover, a new hairstyle, updated clothes, attention to my external presentation. But its true significance lay in the internal revolution it both symbolized and catalyzed, the reclamation of personhood after decades of gradual erasure. Whether Thomas and I would continue evolving together or eventually grow in separate directions remained an open question, one I no longer feared facing. Whatever the future held, I would move through it fully present, fully embodied, fully alive. No longer disappearing, but emerging ever more clearly as myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.